and a copy of the recording will be available on our YouTube channel. Finally, I have something to ask you. If you are not already a member of Devon Wildlife Trust, then please do consider joining us. We are a charity and we rely on the support of our members, supporters and gifts and wills to be able to do the work that we do and care for Devon's wildlife and wild places. Membership starts at just £3 a month, and it really does make a big difference to us and to Devon's wildlife. And details of how to join or to make a donation to us can be found on our website. So after that shameless plug, I'll move right on to the main event. Paul Naylor, who is going to join us now by turning on his camera, is a Devon-based underwater photographer and a marine biologist. He is author of the book Great British Marine Animals, and through working with the Wildlife Trusts and other conservation organisations, Paul is passionate about showing people what beautiful, fascinating and vulnerable creatures live around the British coast. Paul's video footage has featured on the BBC One show, Blue Planet UK and Countryfile, and we are delighted to welcome him here tonight. So thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending this, this talk. It's very new for me to do a talk like this remotely, so please bear with any glitchiness. Okay, so is it all right if I share my screen now, Jan? And okay, as I say, thank you, everyone. Title of my talk, Lives of Devon's Marine Animals, and I think what I want to get over really is people are often very surprised by just how colourful visually our marine life is, what stunning colours are. You know, they associate it more with that sort of colour with tropical reefs and so on. But what I think is even more impressive is the colourful nature of their behaviour and their habits, and I think that's fascinating, and that's what I want to get over. And I hope that you feel by the end of the talk that some of these animals are real characters and you've got to know them a little bit. And here are just some of the characters I'll be talking about. One thing I want to get over as well is how accessible, you know, seeing these animals are. I'm a diver, an underwater photographer. That's me photographing the lines of my jellyfish. But you know, you don't need to put on lots of expensive scuba gear and go miles out into the channel to see this marine life. You can see it, an awful lot of what I'll show tonight. You can see snorkeling, and you might not even need to get wet. Just look into rock pools and you'll see a lot of these creatures going about their lives. And just to illustrate that, there's Teresa, my better half, with minimal equipment, snorkeling in a giant rock pool down in Cornwall. So mask snorkel and bathers, it's all you really need. And these are some of the locations I'll be showing footage from. Almost all of it is from diving and snorkeling from shore. There's Brixham, Thilston, Babbacombe and Wembury. These are the sorts of places. And this is the sort of scenery that in the right conditions is right on our doorstep. These beautiful thongweed forests that cover a lot of our reefs. And just to give you an idea how deep this water is, this photograph was taken at high tide when there's better visibility. But if you look at those sort of greeny and purple snake locks and anemones in the foreground there, if you were to walk on the rocks near them at low tide, you'd probably be in only about thigh deep water. So it really is close to us. And as I say, just in rock pools, you can find some amazing, this is a sort of view of a typical rock pool at Wembury. And in there you can see animals like limpets and beetle anemones. And sometimes people think they're very common and they don't do much. But even an animal like the beetle anemone has fascinating aspects. You know, when the tide's out, like on the left, you see this, what looks like a rather sad little wine gum stuck to the rocks. But of course, when the tide's in, the tentacles come out. They carry thousands of miniature stinging cells. They don't hurt us, but when they're triggered by tiny animals, they fire off these little thread-like harpoons, some of which can inject poison into their prey. Some even can rotate and drill holes in the exoskeletons if they're miniature crustaceans. But the other thing intriguing about them is those blue beads around their sort of middle there, you can just see. And that's why it's called a beadlet anemone. And they're actually used for fighting with other anemones. Because if you imagine, if your lifestyle depends on sitting in a spot and waiting for animals to blunder into you, they're obviously going to be much better places than others to sit. And if you find another anemone in your favoured spot, you sidle up to it very slowly, and then you give it a blast with those blue beads. And you can see this anemone at the bottom. Those beads are really expanded, and that's probably because it's close to those other anemones and it's getting ready for a fight, basically. And the other anemone will react and blast back, and then the weaker one will retreat, and the winner will take over the top spot on the rock. One other story about fighting anemones I just want to share with you. This is a load of plumose anemones on a reef just off Brixham, and they do something quite strange, these sea anemones. They actually, as well as reproducing sexually like all animals, they break off little bits of their base to form new anemones. So they do a bit of cloning as well. So it means when you have a big group like this, then some of them are genetically identical. They're sort of identical twins. So on this patch of reef, there are lots of family members, if you like. And apparently if any other anemone gets close to them, they will lash out with their special fighting tentacles at the other anemone. And they will do that unless the other anemone is of the opposite sex or it's a clone mate. So if it's not a family member or say opposite sex, they'll lash out. And I think sometimes that reminds me of some sort of pretty seedy nightclubs. But anyway, let's move on. And there's another story about sea anemones. These are large snake-lox anemones. They can get up to sort of dinner plate size. Again, these are in very shallow water. And at one time, I don't know if any of you remember, there was a headline in the Evening Herald, Plymouth, about sea anemones eating sharks at the National Marine Aquarium. And they were losing some of their tiny baby cat sharks at the aquarium and wondering where they were going in the night. And they were actually being eaten by these anemones. So they're quite fearsome, but they're no match for these guys. These is a band of grey sea slugs crawling up to these snake-lox anemones. And they do something amazing, these grey sea slugs. They can actually eat the whole anemone, obliterate it, like this one's doing here. But they don't just not mind the stinging cells, which put off most animals from eating sea anemones, but they actually use the stinging cells. They manage not to trigger them off, and they pass them through into those little sort of protuberances on their backs where they sit and wait. And if, say, a fish comes and tries to nibble at the sea slug or eat it, it actually gets stung by the second-hand anemone cells. So I think that's just an amazing piece of recycling, if you like. Now, another sort of, you might think, a real go-slow mollusk is the limpet. People see these clamped to the rocks at low tide and think they don't do anything, but they're hugely important in the marine ecosystem on the shore, because they, beaches like when limpets were wiped out by the Torrey Canyon disaster, and all the beaches, rocky beaches, were choked with seaweed. They control the seaweed growth, very important. And because they graze at high tide, they move around the rocks, but they always, or almost always, go back to the same spot at low tide. And there, in that spot, they grind their shell against the rock and make a sort of circular patch. And you can see those in the bottom part of the main picture, and also in the smaller picture. These circles look almost man-made. Those are limpet home scars, and they've made those, and they need to get back to their own individual one for low tide. And it was wondered for ages how they did that. There is theories that the Victorian scientists tried to test, but the main method is probably a trail of slime that they leave and they follow. But what's even cleverer is that when you've got a whole group of limpets like that, they aren't, all the trails cross, but they know which is their trail because their own trail has an individual chemical signal which they can recognise. But if you scrub away the slime, like these Victorian scientists tried, the limpets still get home because they have various backup techniques, like for any animal that really relies on navigation. for its livelihood, it has backup methods. So that's the limpet. But the other thing about limpets people don't expect is to see them fighting. And here you have a pair on a rock, one of them trying to jam its shell underneath the other one. And in the literature, that's described as territorial fighting, because they have a patch that they like to graze algae on, and they're trying to drive away the other limpet. But when I showed a sort of selection of my limpet fighting photographs to a limpet specialist, he thought there was something else going on, which was that the one limpet was trying to get onto the other one's shell to eat the seaweed that's growing there. Because if you look, the seaweed growth on the limpet shells is actually a lot sort of more lush than it is on the rocks. And the other limpet's taking grave exception to this and trying to sort of shake the other limpet away. And you think, why is it doing that? Because, you know, it's no skin off its nose to have its mate graze the algae. But why that is because limpets are programmed to really not like another sort of snail-like animal crawling on their shell. Because it might not be another limpet after a free snack. It might be one of these guys. This is a dog whelk, the driller killer of the seashore, and that sits on limpets like this one is here, and it can drill using a mixture of sort of mechanical drilling and a chemical softener to drill a neat little hole in the limpet, and then it sucks. It sort of puts in digestive enzymes into that hole, turns the inside into limpet soup, and sucks it out. And you can see why limpets take pretty much against that. And if you look at empty limpet shells on the shore, quite often you'll see they have that very neat little hole drilled in them. And that's where a dog whelk's done its work. But I rather like this limpet shell that I found. If you see, it's got one hole. Just realised I might be able to point with my mouse. People can see that. There's one hole that goes all the way through. It finally got, but there are all these other holes where dog whelks started drilling, but the limpet managed to shake them off. So this limpet was a bit of a survivor and got to a ripe old age before it got. Okay, another animal on the shore that people take for granted, very different from the limpet, although it looks a bit similar, is barnacles, and they are crustaceans. They're not mollusks, they're crustaceans. So they're like a little shrimp, if you like, that cemented itself to the rock, turned its armor plates, instead of a mobile suit of armor, turned it into a little house, and then it waves its feet out of the sunroof to catch food. And here is, hopefully you can see this video play of lots of barnacles all feeding, their little feeding hands coming out and grasping for plankton. Now, you have to be very careful to see that in a rock pool, because if you cast any shadow over the pool, all the barnacles get their hands in, because it might not be you, it might be one of these guys. This is a shanny, also called a common blenny, and especially the young ones, their main food is actually the feeding hands of barnacles. They sit on the rock and they nibble off the feeding hands if they can catch them. Shannies are a very interesting fish in their own right. This is a rock pool ramble at Wembury, many years ago now. But this arrow shows where one of these shannies is living in the rocks. And you can see that as this was taken at low tide, the shanny was left high and dry. And they can actually survive in crevices well out of the water for about half the tidal cycle. They can take oxygen in through their skin and throat. And actually, if you look at that top picture, you can see the odd strange reflection. That's because it's taken out of the water. And those little globules on the ceiling of the crevice and on the floor are actually the eggs, and they're being looked after by a male shanny. And we'll come back to this theme of males do a lot of the egg guarding in shallow water fish. Okay, don't know what's happened here. Right, okay, so about that glitch. Right, we're back on. Okay, another animal on the shore really familiar is the shore crab. And of course, the big thing about shore crabs is they have this wonderful suit of armor that gives them great protection, and it gives them strong claws, great mouth parts, the sort of armored warriors of the seashore. But the trouble is that it doesn't stretch like our skin. It needs to be shed. So if you find two what looks like a pair of crabs under a stone like this. Often it isn't a pair of crabs, it's actually that larger crab has just climbed out of the armour suit in front of it. And people often ask, what are all these dead crabs on the beach? And they're not dead crabs, they're actually the armour of living crabs that they've left behind. And just to give you an idea, this is the successive armour suits from a pet crab I had when I was a marine biology student, called Craig. I've always been a bit strange. These are Craig's clothes. They're about half his life cycle, these armour suits that he shed and I kept. And but now what I hope to show you is molting in action, an actual molt. Now most crabs hide away to molt, shed their armour, because they're very, very vulnerable when they first come out of their armour. They're soft before it rehardens, and so they hide away, and if they don't, they're in trouble, they get eaten. But there's one species that sort of relies on safety in numbers, and that's the spider crab. And there are a few places in Devon where they congregate in the summer to molt, to go through one of their molts. And one of these famous places is Barnacles, and this is one of the molting mounds at Barnacles. And hopefully this video will show you one of these congregations of crabs, and it will show, we come across here a molt that's just started. You can see the new crab emerging from the old suit, and in a moment the video gets sped up about 10 times. You'll see there now it's sped up. You'll be glad, because otherwise this would take about 20 minutes instead of 2 minutes. And you see the crab, it's a big effort to get out of that old armour. So you can see the old armour's like a little hat on the top and bottom, and it's now pumping its legs out. And it's also actually extricating its gills from a structure inside the shell. So when you pick up one of those old armour suits on the shore and lift the back up, you know it's an armour suit because it doesn't smell like a dead crab. You'll see part of the gill structure left. So this is a big effort now for the crab to get all those legs out. And the thing about this molt that they congregate for, here's one taking a sneaky extra view, but this molt is actually the pubertal molt, the molt when the crab, you know, becomes sexually mature, reaches puberty. And like our puberty, it's when the sex differences become obvious, and it is for spider crabs too. So for the male spider crab, and this is a male, this is the first time his big claws that are much bigger than the females come out. So now he's got the legs out, and the big effort now is to get these big claws out, because this is the first time they've seen the light of day. And I find it amazing to think that they were all compressed, coiled up inside the old armour, which had much smaller claws. You've now got to pull the big claw out. And that's the effort. And luckily, as I say, for him, the other crabs are leaving him well alone. Remember, other crabs wouldn't be doing this. Other crabs would be doing it secretly, hiding away in a crevice, because other crabs, including of their own species, would just eat them. Okay, now another feature of the molt of spider crabs is, someone's put this green circle, I don't know, on the screen. They want to get rid of that now. The other thing spider crabs do is they attach bits of seaweed or anything else that's handy to their shell. And you can see a few examples there of crabs that have done that. They've attached bits of seaweed to camouflage themselves. The one in the bottom right's really gone to town on it. And in fact, if that was in a clump of seaweed, you wouldn't see it at all. It was just obvious because it was crawling across a bit of sand. But what I hadn't sort of appreciated is that, of course, when you molt and shed your armour and have a new suit of armour, you've got to redecorate the new shell. And so after one of these molts, we found these spider crabs at Barnacles, all attaching new decoration to their armour, which was wonderful to see. You can see they're picking up little bits of seaweed and rubbing them against the backs of their shell until they stick. And I think it's remarkable, the dexterity that they're showing. I'm just trying to get rid of this greens. Can anyone else see the green circle and things? Okay, so they do that now. They don't attach the seaweed to the big spines. They actually attach them to these little Velcro-like hooks on their shell. And if you look at them close up, they look just like Velcro. So the spider crab actually invented Velcro. But there's more to it as well. Here's another, this is a female crab, and she's decorating herself. You can see big bit of weed she's attaching to her back. But what she's doing before she does every bit of seaweed, she's actually chewing it in her mouth parts. And we thought initially she was perhaps just testing the seaweed to see if it grows, to see if it's tasty. And if it's not, she'll use it to do her eyebrows like she's doing here, or do her legs in a minute. Can anyone get rid of that green circle?
Hi, Paul. We're just trying to see now if anybody is drawing on screen. Could they please stop doing that and maybe delete what they've done? We're just trying to see what's causing it. Don't think it's
gone. Thank you very much. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. It first came up. So that's how spider crabs decorate themselves. Now, other animals like sea scorpion, they don't need to attach bits. They've sort of got built-in camouflage. This is a very common fish in shallow water. It's not poisonous like the tropical sea scorpions, but it sort of looks a bit like, and it can actually change colour beautifully to match surroundings. And those are all the same species of different sea scorpions that all changed colour to match. But they sometimes get spotted, however well they try and camouflage. And this is just to introduce our next character, really, which is the common cuttlefish. And this cuttlefish has seen a small sea scorpion hiding in the seaweed at the bottom of the picture. And I'm sorry the video's quite wobbly, but this is in the swell, and this is only in just a few feet of water. That's why it's wobbly. And that's the end of the sea scorpion. And I thought, did it really catch it? Sure enough, if you look close up there, you can see the unfortunate sea scorpion's tail just poking out of the out between the cuttlefish's arms. Cuttlefish are amazing animals. They've got all sorts of talents, but their sort of most famous one is the way they can change colour. Those top two pictures show a cuttlefish that's just landed on a gravel seabed, and a few seconds later, it blends in perfectly. And in the bottom picture, can you see it's using its arms to imitate those brown tendrils of seaweed to blend in, so they can change the texture of their skin as well as their colour. And they also use their colours to signal. This is a male mating with a female. The female's on the left. He's grasping her by the head and he's passing her a packet of sperm. And those arms at the side that he's extended, stretched out, and they've got stripes at the top, spots at the bottom, and that's a well-known cuttlefish signal, which basically means keep away, I'm busy. So he's saying that to me probably there as a nosy photographer, get away. But here he's telling other cuttlefish to keep away, other competitors. He's guarding the female below him. And again, you can see he's using the arms stretched out with those stripes and spots to say, clear off, this is my partner. And the male guards the female very conscientiously. Here's a male guarding a female while she lays her eggs, because up until she actually lays the eggs, they aren't fertilised by the sperm she's storing. So a male that sneaks in now could actually fertilise those eggs. So he guards her right up until she's finished laying her eggs. And just to complete the picture, there are some eggs, aptly known sea grapes, because they're about the size of sea grapes, and they look just like that. But each one is tied on like a little strap by a little strap to the seagrass. And on the right is a new hatchling cuttlefish, probably about the size of your little fingernail. And one of the reasons I've shown that picture is that you can see in its back there the outline of the cuttlebone. So that bit is what gets washed up on the beach after they're dead and you put in the bungee cage. But you can see by looking at that some of those big cuttlebones that you find on the beach belong to really good sized cuttlefish. Okay, carrying on the sort of breeding theme, The next animal I'll show you is cork-wing wrasse. And this beautifully coloured animal is again really common in shallow water. One of the first fish you'd see snorkeling if you went off one of our rocky beaches in the summer is one of these guys. And this guy is particularly bold, and he's got these amazing bright colours because he's built a nest. And people don't think of fish as building nests, but this cork-wing wrasse, here is actually one building a nest. This is just very close to Wembury Beach, and this big mass of seaweed under the overhang there, he's built. And he's not just using any old seaweed, he actually uses different types of seaweed, up to about 10 different types for different parts of the nest. So he'll use sort of soft seaweed for the inside, where he'll hope to get a female to lay her eggs. He'll use crusty seaweed for the outside, and found out recently that that crusty seaweed he puts on the outside, the fragments actually continue to grow after he puts them there. So they knit the outside of the nest together, keeping the nest strong. Here he is coming back with a big bit. And we once showed this video to someone, and they initially didn't believe that it was taken just in our local waters because the fish was so colourful. But they have a tough old time, the cork-wing wrasse. They have this nest to build. They can, if this one's underneath a reef, but often they build on the top of reefs, and they're quite vulnerable to predators. And they also have another issue, because this is our male in the top left, who's a conscientious nest builder. And the other four you can see there are supposed females, or what we think of as what you'd expect to be females. They're drabber colour, and they all, can you see underneath their belly, they have a blue, what's called an egg-laying papilla, that's a signal to a male that they're ready to come and lay eggs in his nest. But while about 90% of males are these brightly coloured nest builders, about 10% are what are called sneakers, and they look just like females, identical to females, and they sneak into males' nests just after a real female, and they sneak fertilizations. So he's got that to cope with. And if all that isn't enough, so I'll just go back there a minute, because this is an issue that's worth telling you about, sadly, and that is another issue that wrasse have, is that they are captured. There's a fishery for wrasse now in some of our waters to transport them to Scottish salmon farms where they're used. And of course, it's a one-way ticket. Often they're only used for one cycle. So there's quite a high demand. And there is a restriction on the fishery. It is a controlled fishery, which it isn't even in Scotland, unfortunately. But I think for us who are worried about the reef's ecology and about the wrasse themselves, obviously we'd much rather that the fishery didn't happen at all. And that's something that Devon Wildlife Trust have been very active in making sure that fishery is minimised and controlled as much as possible, and if possible, stopped. Certainly if monitoring indicates wrasse declining. So just want to go back. This is our wrasse building a nest, and introduce our next character by showing you this one, who's building his nest in a very unsuitable spot. And that's because it's in the territory of this guy who chases them off. This is the feistiest character on the reef, I think, this Tompot blenny. And it isn't just wrasse he chases off. Here he is. He's keen on chasing me away. He's actually showing off right in front of my camera lens. This is a wide angle lens. And this is Brett, the Tompot blenny. And this is a threat posture, really. He's thinking, what's he got this camera for in my territory? I want him gone. Now, you might think I'm being very fanciful, sort of giving him a name, but Tompot blennies are, what's marvellous about them, apart from everything else about them, they're individually recognisable by particular marks on their skin. And a lot of them are territorial males that we can recognise, like the one below who's guarding that raft of eggs. So they keep a territory. And we've done a lot of research and learnt a lot of new things about Tompot blennies by, you can see there, for example, just in one patch of reef, recognising lots of individual blennies, and you find out all sorts of things, new things about their life, how the fact that they can keep territories over winter, so they can keep the same territory for many years. A male, females go back to the same spots as well. And there are sneakers as well. And this is, well, I explain a little bit about blenny biology while I show this video, which is showing a female who's upside down on the left, laying her eggs with one of the resident males. So that's a male, slightly darker colour on the right, and that's Bertram. And one of the things, by recognising him, we know that he was initially a sneaker. It wasn't even known that Tompot blennies had sneakers like the wrasse do, but they do. And Bertram, when he was younger, he was a sneaker, but he's now turned into a sort of respectable territory-owning blenny. And there he is. And you can see he's rather grey around the mouth. That's from fighting other blennies, probably other males, for the best territories. It's the best territories where you can invite females in to lay their eggs and then guard them. They're sort of the ultimate prize for the blenny. And you see he's quite bossy, shifting around to lay eggs exactly where he wants them. And he will get several different females in to lay eggs over the course of the breeding season. And the females will also lay eggs with several different males. So there's sort of, it's easy both ways, but both genders are very choosy because they put a lot of investment. The female, like all females, is producing eggs, which is a big investment, and the males are guarding a limited territory, which is a big investment. So they're both choosy. And where you've got both genders choosy, you've got very complicated lives. And just a little bit about recent developments. This is one particular spot. You can see how close it is to Wembury Beach, literally a stone's throw from low tide mark. Now, usually a blenny will keep a territory, a male blenny will keep a territory for several years. And we see Plato there, who started out in April this year. He'd kept it for the last 3 years. But can you see he's badly injured round the mouth? And I suspect that was fighting with Clifford, who took it over, that territory, that same crevice, for a month. But possibly from that fight, they were both so injured that they both lost it, they both lost out. And another blenny came in for less than a week, we think. But then finally, we had Quaid. And if you're wondering why it's called Quaid, I was looking for a boy's name that meant fourth, because he was the fourth blenny to occupy that crevice this summer, which is really unusual. And Quaid's still there. And if following the normal Tompot blenny pattern, he should be there for several years guarding that crevice. But why we think there's so much turmoil is because sand has covered some of the crevices at the bottom of the reef, which has made the sort of made more competition for the crevices at the top of the reef. So these environmental changes sort of have knock-on effects. And just a bit more about Tompot blennies. Not only are they fascinating biologically and photogenic, but they are also great ambassadors for our marine life because they're so sort of charismatic and colourful. And with the help of the wildlife trusts, we've done quite a lot of sort of outreach work and had some lovely, as well as the scientific reports, had some nice media coverage, which really sums them up, sort of the small fish with a big personality, and the one show calling it a soap opera, and so on. But all that have stressed, all those articles have always stressed how colourful British marine life is and surprising, which is sort of what we want to get over. But my favourite one was when I went on Radio Devon, sort of this mini chat show. I was introduced as an underwater photographer, and the first question they asked was, "Where have you just come back from?" And I think they expected me to say Indian Ocean or the Red Sea. And when I said, "What do you mean back from? All this photography is around here, around Devon." And they were absolutely gobsmacked by that. Just an example of how sort of, how surprising our marine life is. And something we've done as well is Teresa has written this book for children called Benny the Blenny's Adventure, which is about a reef life sort of through a fish's eyes. And why I'm showing that is because one of Teresa's more eccentric marketing ideas when the book was first published was to take it down and show the real fish. And here is the real fish. Here's Benny coming out to look at his book. Now, rather soggy, there he is, having a good read. And that's not Photoshop. That really is Benny the Blenny coming out to look at a book because he's so curious. And so that really brings me, hopefully, introducing some of these characters to the end of the talk, I've got various websites, a Vimeo site showing video, my website, Marine Photo, where you can see photographs and video. Please visit them. Benny the Blenny, that's aimed more at children. And particularly, I do a lot on Instagram at the minute, a sort of daily UK marine life stories. So please have a look at that if you're interested. And sort of finally, I usually end talks by just putting a bit about how we can help our marine life, because although it is wonderful, it could be even better. And I put up these two and say, you know, what can we do to turn the rather dour looking blenny on the left into the cheery blenny on the right? And there are various things we can do, but probably the most important thing just at the moment is to support campaigns for highly protected marine areas. We've had a lot of marine protected areas for several years now, but they don't offer, in almost all cases, a really good level of protection. So, and that we can change that if we all get behind this campaign. So please go on Devon Wildlife Trust's website and sort of show your support for this campaign. It's really important, and that will help, and it will make a real difference. So please do that. Other things, probably the biggest threat to marine life is really overfishing, unsustainable fishing. So we can all help by buying only sustainable seafood. There are lots of projects around that people can get involved in: beach cleans, surveys, citizen science type things for divers, snorkelers, and coast walkers and so on. Have a look at that. As I'm sure you know, plastic's a big hazard in the marine environment. Less we use, more recycle, the better. But also, as I've hopefully stressed quite a bit, is just share our enthusiasm and tell people what's there, because so many visitors to Devon, you know, look out at the sea, which can sometimes look a bit grey and cold, and they just think nothing lives there. And if they knew what was there and what was going on and the stories that were unfolding there, I think they'd look after the sea a lot better. So I think that's really something to get over. So I'll end the talk there and look forward to hearing your questions. But thank you very much for listening. So shall I stop sharing now, Jan?
Yes, please. Thank you, Paul. That was fascinating. I really enjoyed that, and what a fantastic end. Some of you may not realise, but it's National Marine Week this week, which is a strange anomaly because it's not actually a week; it's about 10 days or so. But we're coming to the end of that now, and I just think your talk was a wonderful way to end National Marine Week. So thank you ever so much. And we've had lots of questions, so I'll kick off with them. And I don't know if we'll get a chance to get through all of them, but we'll get through as many as we can. So first one that I have is, you've obviously been diving for quite a long time, Paul. Do you have a favourite Devon dive site?
I probably like, just because I've dived there so often, at Wembury, but I think that why I like it, I mean, it is wonderful. There's wonderful habitats there, but I think often it's anywhere you go a lot turns into your favourite, because you get to know individual spots, and as you've seen, even individual animals. And for me, that's what makes a place special. Just if you're after good places, snorkeling, Torbay, you know, there are a lot of good places around Torbay. And another really lovely one is at Thurleston or South Milton. The Rock Arch there is quite famous. And it's wonderful snorkeling around there. And there's a wreck at the other end of the beach for divers where wrasse go, and there's a bit of a cleaning station. So that's a wonderful place too.
That's great. And one question that we've had from somebody that's keen to go snorkeling, but he's wondering if there are any snorkeling groups that you can join if you're nervous about or uncomfortable about going snorkeling on your own. Are you aware of any sort of clubs or snorkeling groups that people can join?
There are some. If I could plug Wembury again, the Wildlife Trust Marine Centre, they do snorkel safaris and they do snorkel sort of coaching for beginners. So that would be a good place to start.
They do. I will jump in there because they're not actually running this summer because of COVID, unfortunately. They've not been able to run their summer program, but we will hopefully be starting that up next year. And yes, they do regular snorkeling safaris around at Wembury, in Wembury Bay. So that's a great one for people to join into. Yeah.
Yeah, there may be others. And just something to add there, particularly snorkeling. If you're a bit nervous about snorkeling, it's for everyone really. Be fussy about conditions. You see people sometimes trying to snorkel when there's a bit of a swell coming into a beach and lots of sort of seaweed floating around, it's murky, and they get put off and think, oh, can't snorkel around Britain. So just be patient and wait for those days when the sea's sort of glassy calm and you can go into shallow water and just hover around and watch fish underneath you. So be fussy.
That's really good advice.
Be condition fussy.
Okay, I like this one. How do anemones manage to eat sharks? Do they crush them? Do they dissolve them? How do they manage to do that?
Good question. They are very, very small sharks, but what they basically do is I mean, the shark would probably be, say, it would be about, you know, the mermaid's purses that you find on the beach. They are shark egg cases. So if you imagine a fish that's so small that it's just come out of there, that would be how big the sharks were that being eaten by the anemones. But what the anemone does is it fires off these little harpoons that stick to the prey, whether it be a baby shark or prawn, and then it folds the sort of tentacles around the prey and pulls it into its mouth, and then it does digest them. And inside, and it doesn't have a back end. It's sort of quite primitive. It puts everything out its mouth as well. So quite often, if you see anemones on the shore, you'll see odd bits of bone and shrimp shell sort of around its mouth, because that's what it's just spat out.
So they burp.
yes, basically. Yeah, get rid of the waste products that way.
Another question here on a species, which is, how big do sea scorpions grow to?
Those sea scorpions, I think it's about 20 odd centimetres. Generally they're a lot smaller, the ones you find on the shore, but I think it's sort of 20 centimetres, maybe a little bit bigger, but not much.
It's quite big. Okay. And another question now on cuttlefish, couple on cuttlefish now, which is, why do cuttlefish have wavy irises?
Oh, I know what you mean. The W-shaped iris. I think it's just the way, because if you see them at night, you see the eye much more open, and it's just a way of, it's just been a convenient shape that if that W sort of straightens out, it lets a lot more light in, and as it folds up, it forms that wavy pattern. So I think it's just the adaptation, the way it's formed. But the cuttlefish eye is very similar to our eye. It's in biology, it's a classic example of convergent evolution. So it evolved totally separately to our eye, but it's got very similar features.
Good. Okay. And how do they change their appearance?
Right, the skin is full of thousands of colour cells, which are like miniature plastic bags full of pigment. And if you imagine, if they contract, they make a little dark dot in the middle of the white skin. So the skin basically looks white. But there are muscles attached around the edge of the colour cell, and they can pull it out, flatten that little bag of pigment into a flat disc, which then makes the skin look dark. And it's because the skin changes colour by those muscles acting, and those muscles are like our muscles, you know, they're operated by a brain. The cuttlefish got quite a sophisticated brain, so they can change pattern on their skin just like we can move our fingers or arms around. That's why they can do it so quickly.
They really look like amazing creatures, aren't they?
So.
Okay, another one now on barnacles. We're jumping around here. On your slide of barnacles, there was a growth at around the base of the barnacles. It looked a little bit like lichen, but what was it?
Oh, I don't know. It could have been. I'm not sure if lichens would grow in that bit, but there are shore lichens, and they're also probably an algae or a sponge encrusting, but lots of things will quite happily grow on barnacle shells. Quite often you'll see a sponge, orange sponge, cover the whole barnacles and just a little hole with a feeding hand poking out.
Excellent. Okay. Next question. Is there a best time of day or year or tide in order to see marine wildlife if you're going out snorkeling?
I think, I mean, spring is sort of later in the summer, the water gets a bit warmer, but May time, there tends to be a lot going on, May, June, certainly the summer, you know, shoaling fish come in, and a lot of fish are building nests and breeding and so on a bit bolder. Low tide, unless, is easier because probably for most places you're closer to the marine life. You'd need to sort of dive down a bit deeper if the tide's in. But it does depend on the place. But what I would say is the most important thing, more than tides or anything, is what I said before. You know, wait for it to be calm. So places like Wembury and Thurleston, you need a north wind, offshore wind. Torbay, a sort of, you can dive there in a west wind, but you want to avoid east winds. So really, somewhere it's calm. That's the most important single thing.
That's great. Okay. And one now on the wrasse. There's a question here about, you mentioned about the Scottish fishery taking wrasse from our waters. In fact, they're in protected waters as well. What do the Scottish fisheries use the wrasse for?
They put them in the salmon cages, so they remove the parasites from the salmon. Because they, I don't have time to say, but wrasse are naturally, in the environment, they are cleaner fish. They clean larger fish and each other. They remove parasites, and they'll continue to do that when they put in the salmon cages.
Okay.
But as I say, they're only used.
They're quite packed together, aren't they, in those salmon cages?
Sorry?
They're quite packed together in those cages,
Yes.
aren't they? So it's not a very healthy environment for.
No, and the wrasse, I believe, are, well, there's certainly, it's a one-way ticket. They never come back, and I believe they're only used for one cycle of the salmon. They're killed after one cycle, so there's a continuous demand for the wrasse.
And there's a question here now that's about spider crabs, and a comment really here. It said, for the last few years, spider crabs have aggregated at Babacom, but they've chosen a different site this year. Is there any reason why they would change sites?
No, I really don't know. People often ask sort of why the spider crabs here. I really don't know the reason for that. Whether it's sort of currents and tides at the particular time they come in, really don't know.
Okay, you failed us, Paul.
I'd love to know myself. The number of times I've been up to look for them and not found them straight away, you know. So
okay, this is quite a big question here, but I'm sure is one that lots of people have been wondering about as well. Is that you know, you've been diving for a long time, and what changes have you seen that you think may be attributable to global warming in that time?
You see new species coming in. Some of the changes to fish populations possibly caused by climate change, but more, you know, fishing pressure is a much more severe threat there. But climate change, you see, there are various sort of sea squirts and animals like that can survive better now, that are potentially invasive. And we've got a new blenny on the block, called the variable blenny, which was first seen a few years ago and is now thriving in Plymouth Sound. And its sort of normal range is from Africa to Spain in the Atlantic, and that's now home. And though, you know, that's almost certainly due to climate change that's able to survive here. But the one to sort of, sadly, to watch out for, even more than sort of changes in species distribution, is ocean acidification. It's sometimes called the evil twin of climate change, and that's a change in pH as more carbon dioxide dissolves in the sea, and that has potentially huge implications for marine life. I don't think we've seen a big effect yet, but it's yet another reason to, massive reason to minimise climate change, man-made climate change.
What sort of changes would that cause?
Well, it would affect, because it basically affects any animal that lays down a calcium skeleton. So because that process is so sort of sensitive to pH, so it's not only obvious animals like crabs and oysters and mollusks, but starfish, normal bony fish. It would just be massive, and certainly the scientists who are looking into that say that is the big threat that no one's really sort of talking about.
I'm sure that they will be now.
Yeah.
Sure, it's going to be the cause of a campaign. I can feel it coming on. Yeah. Another question here on the blenny. You mentioned the blennies again. Somebody wants to know what are the feathery bits on their head for, and are they delicate?
Good question. They're certainly very soft. I don't know if I've got some video you might come across where it shows a blenny having a bad hair day. When it's swell, they sort of sway about, so they're quite soft. And if you find them on the beach, they collapse without water there. But they have some sort of chemosensory function. They sense chemicals in the water, but they're also used to attract mates. And we don't some lovely work by a student at Cornwall College, Louise Hammond, showed that males have significantly longer head tentacles than females. And in other species, tropical species, they've been found to be a way that females judge male success, how big their head tentacles are. But they also seem to vary depending on where they live around the coast. And it's just another a fascinating story that blennies have for us, I think, where the tentacles might get bigger, perhaps where the population's denser and they're competing more. It's a lot more to find out.
There is, isn't there? There is somebody here as well that's interested in learning more about sea creatures that recycle other animal features. So, for example, sea slugs using poison, as you've discussed, as you've mentioned. But what other features might they recycle?
Another lovely one is, it's actually a sea slug again. It's called the solar-powered sea slug because it eats algae and it uses some of the trying to think what they're called, the little photosynthetic bits. Is it chloroplasts in algae, and it actually uses them in its own tissues to make sugars, to make food for it in the sun. And so that's one sea slug. I mean, hermit crabs have these relationships with anemones where they use them for their defense. A lovely one is where you show spider crabs attaching the seaweed, but other spider crabs also use bits of sponge. You can see they break off little pieces of sponge and stick them on, and the sponge then continues to grow. It's quite simple animal sponge, and it actually makes a complete sponge coat for the crab. And sponge tastes horrible. That's why, that's how it defends itself. So crabs end up with this horrible tasting and slimy coat that stops other things eating them.
Excellent. Okay. Another question here then that we have is if somebody wanted if somebody wanted to take action basically to help better protect our seas, what could they personally do if they were to go out tomorrow and wanted to do something? What could they do? What would be the most beneficial thing that they could do?
Oh, I think really that sort of on that list, support sustainable seafood. When you buy fish, make sure you only buy sustainable fish. And just, people often say, oh, it's so confusing, I don't, but if you just ask, at a supermarket, which is your sustainable fish, or in a restaurant, it sort of reinforces this idea that we need to do that. I'd also say, and I'm not just saying this because of where I am now, but support people like, support your wildlife trust, support Devon Wildlife Trust for the campaigns, for things like highly protected marine areas, and better monitoring or continued monitoring and possible closure of the wrasse fishery, and then use less plastic, recycle it better, all those things. and also raise, you know, help raise awareness when you're on beaches. Tell people what's there. If you're rock pooling, explain what you're looking at, and just, yeah, raise awareness.
Fantastic. Okay, I think I've just got time for just two other just very quick questions. One which was about rock pooling, which is somebody who would like to know what is the difference between a rock lobster and a crayfish.
Right, okay. Rock lobsters are not, I'm not, rock lobsters, there are, the only lobsters, we have common lobsters, which are the blue ones, and then we have crawfish, sometimes called spiny lobsters, which are the ones without they're pink, they haven't got the big claws, they've got the huge antennae, and they're the ones that were fished out and now coming back. They're crawfish, and a lot of divers call them crays, as in crayfish, but that's actually a bit inaccurate. Crayfish should only be used for the freshwater ones. So they're crawfish or spiny lobsters, but people do call them crays. And rock lobster, I'm not sure whether that would mean the spiny lobster or the common blue lobster.
Okay, thank you. And then last question, which I like, is what has been the most surprising thing that you've come across? Put you on the spot a bit there.
Wow. Well, I think possibly the other morning, no, just really recent one, I was watching a male variable blenny with a female variable blenny, getting it together in their home, and they're called variable blennies because they occur in these different colour forms. And another form is this stripy form, which is a white one with a black stripe. And then I saw one of these stripy ones around, and it jumped into bed with the other two. So there was a ménage à trois in the crevice. There was a male, very distinctive, all black. There was a what you think of as a normal female, brown, and there was then this new type, and the stripy one. And is that a sneaker? Is it a satellite male that you have, or is it another female different? So you can see there's just so much mystery.
Well, there you go. I didn't expect it to be that. That's great. Well, we're coming basically to the end of our time now. We've just got a minute left, so thank you Paul. It was really interesting, really fantastic photography, and really informative presentation, so thank you ever so much. And
thank you for setting it up.
Sorry?
Thank you for setting it up.
You're welcome. And thank everybody else for joining us. And one last shameless plug, to please join Devon Wildlife Trust if you're not already a member. It really does make a difference to us, and really does help us with our campaigns, not just for marine and helping our marine environment, but also for our work with Devon Wild Places and Devon's wildlife. You may have in fact actually seen today we've been in the news quite a lot with our beavers, which have now been allowed to stay, and this has come as a result of a lot of 5-6 years basically of hard work that's resulted in this decision. So if you do join us as well, we do have a beaver talk coming up next, which will be one of these talks. The details are going to be released in the next week or so. So and members will be given priority on that talk for booking. So there you go, is another reason to become a member if you're not already. So thank you ever so much, everybody. It's been great, really fantastic evening. So thank you ever so much. Thank you, Paul, and thank you for joining us. Good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.